His card was declined, humiliated in front of his daughter, but then the waitress leaned in and whispered, "Your bill is $1 million." And suddenly, everything he thought he knew about his life was turned upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Eli Harper's old pickup truck as it rumbled down the quiet streets of their small southern town. His fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel while he stole glances at his daughter Lucy, who sat quietly in the passenger seat, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Almost there, sweetheart," Eli said. His voice warmed despite his exhaustion from working double shifts all week. The extra hours had been worth it to make this special day happen. Lucy pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "I can't believe we're going to a real restaurant, Daddy." Her excitement made his heart squeeze. It had been so long since they'd done anything like this. Too long since he'd seen that spark of pure joy in her eyes. The truck's tires crunched over gravel as they pulled into the parking lot of the Bluebell Diner. The building wasn't much to look at. Weathered blue paint peeling at the corners, a neon sign with a few letters flickering uncertainly. But to Lucy, it might as well have been a five-star restaurant. "Remember when Mommy used to bring me here for milkshakes?" Lucy asked as they walked toward the entrance. The question caught Eli off guard, making him stumble slightly. "She sure did," he managed, his throat tight. "She always said they made the best chocolate shakes in 3 counties. The memory of his late wife, Sarah, sitting in one of those vinyl booths with a tiny Lucy in her lap, brought both warmth and pain. A bell chimed as they pushed through the glass door. The familiar smell of coffee and grilled onions wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Anne, older waitress with faded red hair, looked up from wiping down a table and smiled. "Welcome to Bluebell." "Sit anywhere you like, honey." Lucy tugged on her father's sleeve, pointing to a corner booth near the window. "Can we sit there, Daddy? Please?" "Of course we can, birthday girl." Eli followed her to the booth, watching as she slid across the vinyl seat with barely contained excitement. The menu was already well worn in his mind. He'd studied it online for days, calculating exactly what they could afford. The red-haired waitress approached their table, notepad in hand. Her name tag read, "Betty. What can I get for you folks today?" Lucy sat up straighter, her voice clear and confident. "I'd like a cheeseburger, please, with extra pickles, and French fries, and..." She looked at her father questioningly. Eli nodded, smiling. "And a chocolate milkshake. It's her birthday today." Betty's face lit up. "Well, happy birthday, sweetie. How old are you?" 8, Lucy announced proudly, holding up 8 fingers. My, such a big girl." Betty turned to Eli. "And for you, sir?" He glanced at the menu one last time, though he already knew what he'd order. "Just a coffee and the basic burger, please." The cheaper option would help ensure they stayed within budget. As Betty walked away, Lucy leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "Daddy, why don't you get a milkshake too?" "Coffee's fine for me, sweetheart. Besides, today is all about you." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand, grateful when she didn't press the issue. The food arrived quickly, steam rising from the plates. Lucy's eyes widened at the sight of her burger, piled high with pickles just as she'd requested. The chocolate shake came in a tall glass, topped with whipped cream and a bright red cherry. "This is the best birthday ever," Lucy declared, taking a long sip of her shake. A drop of chocolate appeared at the corner of her mouth, and Eli reached over with a napkin to wipe it away, just like Sarah used to do. They ate slowly, savoring every bite. Lucy chatted about school and her friends, while Eli listened intently, treasuring every moment. For a little while, he could almost forget about the stack of bills waiting at home, the long hours at work, the constant worry about making ends meet. When the plates were empty and Lucy had scraped the last bit of whipped cream from her glass, Betty returned with the check. "How was everything?" "Perfect," Lucy answered, beaming. The shake was just like Mommy said it would be. Betty's expression softened with understanding, and she placed the check face down on the table. "Take your time, Honorable." Eli reached for his wallet, carefully pulling out his debit card. He checked the balance 3 times before they left home, making sure they had enough. Still, his hands trembled slightly as he picked up the check. The total was exactly what he'd expected, $24.87. He should have had just enough to cover it, with a small tip. He slid out of the booth, squeezing Lucy's shoulder as he passed. "Be right back, sweetheart." At the counter, he handed the check and his card to a stern-looking man in a white apron, clearly the manager. The man ran the card through the reader, and Eli's heart stopped as the machine beeped loudly. "I'm sorry, sir," the manager said, not sounding sorry at all. "Your card's been declined." He spoke loudly enough that several nearby customers turned to look. Eli's face burned. "That's impossible. Could you try it again?" The manager sighed dramatically, but ran the card once more. Another harsh beep. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. There are other customers waiting." Eli's stomach churned as he glanced back at Lucy. She was watching him, her earlier joy replaced by concern. He could see other diners staring, whispering behind their hands. The shame was overwhelming, crushing down on his shoulders like a physical weight. I have some cash," he stammered, reaching for his wallet again, though he knew it wouldn't be enough. This was supposed to be a perfect day for Lucy, and now he was ruining it, just like he seemed to ruin everything lately. The fluorescent lights of the diner seemed to grow harsher as Eli stood at the counter, his debit card trembling slightly in his calloused hands. The card reader's harsh beep felt like it echoed through the entire restaurant, and the red decline message glared up at him accusingly. "I'm so sorry." Eli mumbled, his face burning. "Could you try it again?" He could feel Lucy's small hand clutching the back of his worn jacket, her presence making this moment even more unbearable. The cashier, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and thick glasses, sighed and swiped the card again. The same angry beep filled the air. "Sir, there seems to be an issue with your card. Do you have another form of payment?" Eli's stomach churned as he patted his pockets, knowing full well there was nothing there. His wallet contained exactly $2 and an old grocery receipt. The few extra shifts he'd picked up this week wouldn't be paid until next Friday, and his checking account was clearly empty. "Daddy?" Lucy's voice was small and worried. "Is something wrong?" He turned to look at his daughter, her blue eyes wide with concern, and his throat tightened. Her special day was crumbling right before his eyes. The chocolate shake she'd been so excited about sat half-finished on their table, the whipped cream now melting into a puddle. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," he lied, his voice rough. "Just a little mix-up with the card." But Lucy was too smart for that. At 8 years old, she'd already learned to read the worry lines around her father's eyes. The cashier cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside. There are other customers waiting." Eli felt the weight of stares from the people in line behind him. His hands were sweating now, and shame burned in his chest like a hot coal. "Please, I just need a minute to figure this out," he said quietly, though he had no idea what he could possibly figure out. That's when Grace appeared beside them, seemingly out of nowhere. Her name tag was slightly crooked on her blue uniform, and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She had been their waitress earlier, the one who had brought Lucy an extra cherry for her shake with a conspiratorial wink. Grace leaned in close to Eli, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your bill is $1 million, sir, but it's already paid in full." Eli blinked, certain he had misheard her. "I'm sorry, what?" Grace's warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled. "Don't worry about the bill, Mr. Harper. It's taken care of." She turned to the cashier. "Tom, I've got this one covered." "Grace, you can't just—" Tom started to protest, but Grace was already pulling out her own wallet. "I said I've got it," she repeated firmly, sliding her card across the counter. Her voice was gentle but left no room for argument. Eli's chest felt tight with emotion. "Ma'am, I can't let you do that. It's too much." Grace shook her head, still smiling. "Sometimes we all need a little help," she said softly. She pulled a small notepad from her apron pocket, quickly wrote something, and pressed the note into his hand. "Here." Eli looked down at the folded paper. In neat handwriting were the words, "Kindness has no price tag. Pass it on." His vision blurred slightly as he read the message. "I don't know what to say," he managed, his voice thick with gratitude. "You don't need to say anything," Grace replied. She glanced down at Lucy and gave her another wink. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Lucy beamed up at her, the earlier worry forgotten. "Thank you," she chirped, bouncing slightly on her toes. Eli tried one more time. "Please, at least let me pay you back when I—" Grace held up her hand to stop him. "The only payment I want is for you to remember that there are still good people in the world, Mr. Harper, that's all." They made their way to the door, the bell chiming as they stepped out into the evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Lucy's small hand found its way into Eli's as they walked toward their truck. "Daddy?" Lucy asked, looking up at him with curious eyes. "Why would someone do that for us?" Eli squeezed her hand gently, still processing what had just happened. The note felt warm in his pocket, like a reminder that miracles could still happen in small ways. He looked down at his daughter's questioning face, searching for the right words to explain something he barely understood himself. "Sometimes, Lucy," he said slowly, "people do kind things just because they can. Because they know what it's like to need help, or because they want to make the world a little bit better." Lucy considered this as they reached the truck, like when Mommy used to bring cookies to Mrs. Johnson when she was sick. "Exactly like that, sweetheart," Eli replied, his heart both aching and full at the memory. He helped Lucy into her seat, making sure she was properly buckled in before closing the door. As he walked around to the driver's side, he paused for a moment, looking back at the diner. Through the window, he could see Grace moving between tables, carrying plates, and chatting with customers. She had given them more than just a free meal. She had given them back their dignity on what could have been a heartbreaking evening. The note in his pocket seemed to pulse with possibility, its message echoing in his mind. Kindness has no price tag. Pass it on. As he climbed into the truck and started the engine, Eli knew that somehow, someday, he would find a way to do just that. Eli sat at his kitchen table early the next morning, sorting through bills with a cup of lukewarm coffee beside him. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the stack of envelopes. His weathered hands moved, methodically, creating neat piles, utilities, credit card statements, and junk mail. Lucy's cereal bowl sat empty in the sink. She'd already left for school on the morning bus, leaving the house in that peculiar quiet that always followed her departure. The silence made it easier for Eli to focus on the task he dreaded most, figuring out which bills he could pay this month. A plain white envelope caught his attention. No return address, just his name and address written in neat handwriting. He didn't recognize the penmanship, but something about it made him pause. The envelope felt thick, as if it contained more than just a letter. Eli sliced it open with his thumb, pulling out what appeared to be hospital documentation. His brow furrowed as he unfolded the papers, revealing a header from Memorial Regional Hospital. The name at the top made his heart skip a beat. Grace Martin. His eyes widened as they fell on the total amount due, $987,000. "Dear God," he whispered, his coffee forgotten. The bill detailed months of intensive treatment for pediatric leukemia. Patient name, Samuel Martin, age 8. The pieces started falling into place. Grace's words from yesterday echoed in his mind. "Your bill is $1 million, sir, but it's already paid in full." The weight of those words crashed down on him like a physical blow. She hadn't just been kind, she'd been giving from a place of deep understanding and desperate need. Eli's hands began to shake. He spread the papers across the table, reading every line. Chemotherapy sessions, radiation treatments, hospital stays, medications. The list seemed endless. Each item represented a battle that Grace's young son was fighting, while she somehow found it in her heart to help strangers. "How could she?" he muttered, running his hands through his graying hair. The guilt hit him hard in the chest. Here he was, worrying about a dinner bill, while Grace carried the weight of nearly $1 million in medical debt. Yet she'd reached out to help him and Lucy without hesitation. He got up from the table, pacing the small kitchen. The linoleum floor creaked under his feet as he moved, his mind racing. The diner meal she'd covered probably meant sacrificing something else she needed, maybe medication for her son, or a utility bill of her own. Eli stopped at the sink, gripping its edge until his knuckles turned white. Through the window, he could see the morning light touching the tops of the trees, the same sun that would soon shine on Grace's diner, where she'd be serving others with that gentle smile, carrying her burden alone. The image of her son formed in his mind, a boy Lucy's age, fighting for his life while his mother worked long hours to keep them afloat. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. Eli returned to the table, gathering the papers with careful hands. He couldn't ignore this. The kindness Grace had shown him, and Lucy demanded a response. But what could he do? His own financial situation was precarious at best. Still, he knew he had to try. Grace's act of kindness had awakened something in him, a determination he hadn't felt since before his wife's passing. He pulled out a notepad from the kitchen drawer and began to write, listing every skill he had, every possible way he might be able to help. mechanic work, handyman services. He could fix cars, repair homes, do yard work. It wouldn't come close to the amount needed, but it was a start. Maybe he could talk to his church, see if they could organize some kind of fundraiser. The more he wrote, the stronger his resolve became. He might not have money, but he had 2 strong hands and a willing heart. It wouldn't be enough, not nearly enough, but he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Eli looked at Grace's hospital bill one more time before carefully folding it and placing it back in the envelope. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of what it represented. Then he stood up, his decision made. "I'll find a way," he said aloud to the empty kitchen. "Somehow, I'll find a way to help you, Grace." He tucked the envelope into his jacket pocket, where it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The morning sun had climbed higher now, reminding him that he needed to get to his first job of the day. But as he grabbed his keys from the counter, he knew that everything had changed. The simple act of kindness that had meant so much to him and Lucy yesterday now carried a deeper significance. Grace had given from her own place of need, and that gift demanded a response. He didn't know how yet, but he would find a way to help her. He had to. Eli locked the front door behind him, the morning air crisp against his face. The hospital bill in his pocket seemed to pulse with each step he took toward his truck. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a promise he needed to keep, a debt of kindness he had to repay. The bell above the diner door chimed as Eli stepped inside. The lunch rush was over, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffees in worn vinyl booths. His eyes scanned the familiar space, searching for Grace's gentle presence, but she was nowhere to be seen. Behind the counter, a different waitress wiped down the coffee machine. The manager, a heavy-set man with thinning gray hair and perpetually furrowed brows, counted receipts at the register. Eli cleared his throat. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Grace, the waitress who was here yesterday?" The manager barely glanced up. "She doesn't work here anymore. Since when?" Eli's voice cracked slightly. "She was just here yesterday." The manager's shoulders tensed. He set down his stack of receipts with deliberate slowness. "Look, we had to let her go. Personal issues. That's all I can say." "Personal issues?" Eli felt his face grow warm. "You mean because she helped my daughter and me?" The manager's expression hardened. "Like I said, that's all I can say. Now, are you planning to order something?" Eli stood there for a moment, his hands clenched at his sides. The weight of Grace's hospital bill seemed to burn in his pocket where he'd tucked it. Finally, he turned and pushed through the door, the bell's cheerful ring now seeming to mock him. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the cracked pavement. Eli walked to his truck, but couldn't bring himself to leave. He had to find her, had to make this right. The hardware store across the street caught his eye. Old Mrs. Peterson worked there. She knew everything about everyone in town. Inside, the store smelled of sawdust and paint. Mrs. Peterson's face lit up when she saw him. "Eli Harper, how's little Lucy?" "She's good, Mrs. Peterson. Listen, I'm trying to find someone. Grace Martin? She was a waitress at the diner." Mrs. Peterson's smile faded slightly. "Oh, poor dear. Lives out in the Riverside trailer park with her boy. Such a shame about his illness." Eli's heart thumped. "Which trailer?" "Number 17, the blue one at the end." "But Eli." She hesitated. "That family's been through enough. Whatever it is, I just want to help," he said softly. The Riverside trailer park sat on the outskirts of town, where the paved roads gave way to gravel. Eli's truck bumped along slowly as he counted the numbers. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the mobile homes, some well-maintained, others showing years of wear. Number 17 stood apart from the others, its faded blue paint peeling at the corners. A small garden struggled to grow in front, with a few determined marigolds adding spots of color to the dusty ground. And there was Grace. She sat on the wooden steps leading to her front door, her waitress uniform replaced by worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. Her head was bowed, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than she had at the diner. Eli parked his truck and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. The hospital bill crinkled in his pocket as he stepped out. His work, boots crunched on the gravel as he approached. Grace's head snapped up at the sound. Recognition flickered across her face, followed quickly by something like fear. "Mr. Harper?" She stood quickly, smoothing her shirt with nervous hands. "What are you doing here?" Eli stopped a respectful distance away. "I went to the diner," he said quietly. "They told me you weren't working there anymore." Grace's chin lifted slightly. It's fine. These things happen. Because of me? The words felt like stones in his mouth. She shook her head. Please don't worry about it. I'll find something else. Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out the hospital bill. This came to my house by mistake. He watched as the color drained from her face. I want to help. Grace stared at the paper in his hand, then quickly looked away. I don't need help, she said, but her voice trembled, and I certainly don't need pity. It's not pity, Eli said. You helped me and Lucy when we needed it. Let me return the favor. You don't understand, Grace whispered. That bill, it's just one of many. My son. She stopped, pressing her lips together. I understand more than you think, Eli said gently. I lost my wife to cancer 3 years ago. I know what it's like to face these battles alone. Grace's eyes met his, and for a moment, they stood in silence. Two people who knew too well the weight of caring for someone they loved while the world crashed around them. Finally, Grace's shoulders sagged slightly. Would you like to come in for some coffee? She asked. It's not very good, nothing like the diners, but it's hot. I'd like that, Eli said softly. The metal steps creaked as Eli sat down beside Grace, leaving enough space between them to be respectful. The evening air carried the sweet scent of her struggling marigolds, mixed with the lingering warmth of the summer day. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I shouldn't have come to your house, Grace finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. That bill, it wasn't meant for you to see. Eli kept his eyes on the dusty ground. Sometimes things happen for a reason. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. I've always managed on my own, she said. Ever since Sammy's father left, she shook her head. But lately, it feels like I'm drowning. A screen door slammed somewhere in the distance, and a dog barked. The ordinary sounds of life going on around them seemed to emphasize the weight of Grace's words. How old is Sammy? Eli asked gently. 15. A small smile touched Grace's lips. He's so brave, never complains, even on his worst days. Her smile faded. The treatments, they're working, but the bills keep piling up. Insurance covers some, but she gestured helplessly at the hospital bill, still in Eli's hand. And now you've lost your job because of me? Eli said, the guilt heavy in his chest. Grace shook her head quickly. No, that's not. I mean, yes, mister. Peterson wasn't happy about me covering your bill, but it was more than that. I'd been missing too many shifts for Sammy's treatments, coming in late when he had rough nights. She picked at a loose thread on her jeans. I knew it was coming. I just thought I had more time to figure something out. A car drove past, its headlights sweeping across them as the sun continued its slow descent. Grace hugged herself tighter. You know what's funny? She said, though there was no humor in her voice. When I saw you and Lucy in the diner, the way you looked at her, trying so hard to give her a special day, it reminded me of how my dad used to look at me. She swallowed hard. Before he got sick, cancer, just like Sammy. We lost everything trying to save him, and, in the end, her voice cracked. Eli's heart ached. He thought of his own loss, of watching his wife slip away despite everything they'd tried. I understand, he said softly. Grace wiped quickly at her eyes. I just couldn't let Lucy see that look on your face. The one I remember seeing on my mom's when her card was declined. The shame, the helplessness. She took a shaky breath. But now I can't even help myself. Why didn't you ask for help? Eli asked, though he already knew the answer. He saw it in the proud set of her shoulders, in the way she forced herself to sit up straight despite her exhaustion. Pride, I guess. Grace laughed weakly. Stupid, isn't it? Drowning in bills, barely keeping food on the table, and I still can't bring myself to admit I need help. She glanced toward her trailer. Sammy deserves better than this. He deserves a mother who fights for him, Eli said firmly. That's exactly what you're doing. From inside the trailer came the sound of movement. Grace straightened, quickly composing herself. That's him waking up from his nap. The medications make him so tired. Eli stood, brushing off his jeans. I meant what I said about helping, he said. I may not have much, but I'm good with my hands. If anything needs fixing. Grace looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd arrived. Her eyes were tired, but clear. Why would you do that? You barely know us. Because someone once told me that kindness has no price tag, he said simply. A ghost of a smile touched Grace's lips. It was small, but it was real. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll come by tomorrow," Eli said. "That back step looks like it could use some reinforcement." He walked back to his truck, the gravel crunching under his boots. The weight of Grace's story pressed against his chest, heavier than any physical burden he'd ever carried. As he started the engine, he caught a glimpse of Grace in his rearview mirror, still sitting on those worn steps, but her shoulders seemed a little less tense than before. The sun had almost disappeared now, painting the sky in deep purples and fading oranges. Eli drove home slowly, his mind already working through what tools he'd need tomorrow, what supplies he could afford. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of First Baptist Church, casting colorful shadows across the worn wooden pews. Eli Harper shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he waited for the Sunday service to end, his heart hammered against his ribs, knowing what he had to do next. As the congregation filed out, Eli approached Pastor Mike, who stood by the door shaking hands with departing church members. The pastor's weathered face creased with concern when he saw Eli's serious expression. "Pastor Mike, do you have a minute?" Eli's voice was quiet but determined. "Of course, brother." Pastor Mike gestured to a nearby bench. "What's weighing on your heart?" Eli took a deep breath and told Grace's story about her kindness at the diner, her sick son Sammy, and the crushing medical bills. His words tumbled out faster as he explained his idea for a fundraiser. Pastor Mike listened carefully, nodding slowly. When Eli finished, the pastor leaned back and sighed. "That's quite a burden you're taking on, Eli. Have you considered that maybe this isn't your responsibility?" Eli's shoulders slumped. "I have to try, Pastor. She helped me when I needed it most." "I understand, but organizing a fundraiser is a big undertaking. Let me think about how the church might help." The pastor's tone was kind but non-committal. Throughout the day, Eli visited other church members, local business owners, and old friends. Each conversation left him more discouraged than the last. Mrs. Thompson from the quilting circle shook her head and mentioned her arthritis acting up. Bob from the auto shop muttered about tough economic times. Even his cousin Sarah, who usually jumped at the chance to help others, made excuses about being too busy with her kids' activities. By late afternoon, Eli sat in his truck outside the hardware store, feeling defeated. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photo he'd secretly taken of Grace's hospital bill. The numbers seemed to mock him. $987,000. How had he thought he could make a difference? The tap on his window startled him. It was Carl, the hardware store owner, holding 2 cups of coffee. Eli rolled down his window. "Thought you could use this?" Carl said, handing him a cup. "Been watching you sit here for the past 15 minutes. Eli accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thanks, Carl. Just trying to figure some things out." "Heard you've been making the rounds today," Carl said, leaning against the truck. "Talking about that waitress from the diner and her sick boy." Eli nodded, preparing himself for another rejection. "You know," Carl continued, "my sister had cancer 10 years back. Community helped us through it. Maybe it's time we did the same for someone else." He pulled out his business card and scribbled something on the back. "That's what I can donate for a raffle prize. And I know some other folks who might help too." Eli stared at the card. 1 complete home hardware package, $500 value. His hands trembled slightly as he tucked the card into his shirt pocket. "Carl, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just keep going. Sometimes people need to see others taking the first step before they'll join in." Encouraged by Carl's support, Eli drove to the diner. His stomach knotted as he pushed open the door, remembering his embarrassment from just days ago. The manager, Tom, looked up from behind the counter. "Mr. Harper," Tom said, his face neutral. "What can I do for you?" Eli walked up to the counter, standing straight despite his nervousness. "I want to talk to you about Grace." Tom's expression hardened. "Already told you, she doesn't work here anymore. That's not why I'm here." Eli explained his fundraiser idea, watching Tom's face carefully. "I know you had to let her go, but maybe the diner could help in some other way." Tom wiped his hands on his apron, looking thoughtful. "She was a good worker," he said finally. "Always showed up on time, never complained, even that last day." He trailed off, then squared his shoulders. "Tell you what, we could host your fundraiser here. Sunday afternoons are slow anyway. We'll donate 20% of the day's proceeds." Eli's heart lifted. "Really? That would be amazing." "Yeah, well," Tom shuffled his feet. "I felt bad about having to let her go. Maybe this makes up for it a little." By the time Eli left the diner, he had 3 solid commitments: Carl's hardware package, the diner as a venue, and even the local printing shop had agreed to make flyers for free when Tom called them. That evening, Eli sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by notes and ideas. Lucy sat across from him, coloring with her crayons. "What should we call it, sweetheart?" he asked, tapping his pen against a blank piece of paper. Lucy looked up, her face serious. "Remember what the nice lady said at the diner? About the $1 million?" Eli smiled, remembering Grace's whispered words. He wrote across the top of the paper, "$1 million for Grace." The words stared back at him, full of possibility. It wasn't much yet, just a name, a venue, and a few promises of help. But it was a start. Eli thought of Grace sitting outside her trailer, trying to carry her burden alone, and knew he couldn't give up. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest steps. Eli stood at his kitchen table Monday morning, staring at freshly printed flyers. Lucy sat across from him, coloring a hand-drawn poster for the fundraiser. "Do you think people will help, Daddy?" Lucy asked. "I hope so, sweetheart." Eli picked up a flyer reading, "$1 million for Grace, help save Sammy," with details about the fundraiser at Joe's Diner. Eli began his journey through town, visiting every willing shop on Main Street. At Thompson's Hardware, old Mister. Thompson's eyes softened, hearing about Sammy's leukemia. "Put one in my window," he said, pressing $20 into Eli's hand. By lunchtime, Eli had covered downtown. At Mike's Mechanics, the owner stopped him mid-explanation. "I'll fix cars for free during the fundraiser," Mike said. "Folks can donate what they would have paid me to Sammy's fund instead." Eli's throat tightened. "That's really generous, Mike. Sometimes folks just need a helping hand." The afternoon brought more surprises. Sarah, at the flower shop, offered arrangements. The bakery promised cookies. The high school principal agreed to let students earn community service hours, helping. At Joe's Diner, manager Bob had cleared wall space for Lucy's posters. "We'll add more tables that day," he said. A young waitress approached with her morning tips, $12. "It's not much, but every bit helps," Eli assured her. By evening, word had spread. Mrs. Rodriguez caught him at the crosswalk. "My church group wants to cook traditional Mexican food. Everyone loves our tamales." Home again, Lucy had finished her poster, a big heart with "Help Sammy," surrounded by colorful stars. "Can we show it to Grace?" "Tomorrow, sweetie." Eli sat down, emotionally drained but hopeful. Nearly $200 plus promised help, not close to $1 million, but a start. His phone buzzed with texts, Pastor Mike offering the fellowship hall if needed, the radio station requesting an interview, the elementary principal offering to send flyers home with students. The next morning, Eli visited Grace at the hospital. Sammy was having a good day, working on a puzzle. Grace's eyes welled, seeing the growing list of helpers. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to," Eli replied. "You taught me kindness has no price tag, remember?" Lucy taped her poster to Sammy's wall. The boy's tired face lit up with a genuine smile. Leaving the hospital, Eli felt something new, being part of something bigger than himself. His own struggles seemed lighter, shared by caring hands and open hearts. That evening, more offers poured in. Eli sat on his porch watching sunset, no longer overwhelmed by what lay ahead. Mr. Thompson honked, waving as he passed. Down the street, Mrs. Rodriguez and church friends planned their cooking schedule. Bob from the diner stopped to share that 3 more businesses had offered help. The town was coming alive with purpose. Eli thought of Grace's note, "Kindness has no price tag, pass it on." Those words had started a chain reaction he never could have imagined. Lucy joined him with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Are you tired, Daddy?" "A little," he admitted, "but it's a good kind of tired." "Me too. But I'm happy we're helping Sammy and Miss Grace." Eli put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, feeling profound peace despite all the work ahead. They weren't alone anymore, and neither was Grace. The diner buzzed with life, packed wall to wall with people from all corners of town. Streamers and balloons decorated every surface, and hand-drawn posters covered the windows. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade pies filled the air as volunteers weaved through the crowd with collection jars. Eli wiped his forehead with his sleeve, taking a moment to catch his breath. He'd been on his feet for hours, greeting donors and coordinating volunteers. His old mechanic's shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat, but his eyes sparkled with joy as he watched the scene unfold. The bell above the door chimed, and Eli's heart swelled as Grace and Sammy walked in. Grace stopped in her tracks, her hand flying to her mouth. Sammy, looking stronger than he had in weeks, gripped his mother's arm for support. "Oh my goodness," Grace whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the crowd. People turned to look, and a hush fell over the diner. Then someone started clapping, and within seconds, the whole room erupted in applause. Eli made his way through the crowd to greet them. "Welcome to your party," he said softly. Tears welled up in Grace's eyes. "I can't believe all these people came for us? For you?" Eli corrected, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The whole town wanted to help." Sammy looked around in wonder. "Mom, look at all the posters. And did they make a cake?" Indeed, on the counter sat a massive sheet cake decorated with the words "A Million for Grace" in bright blue frosting. Lucy had helped with the decorations, carefully placing sugar flowers around the edges. Throughout the evening, people approached Grace with hugs, words of encouragement, and donations. The local newspaper editor pledged a portion of next month's advertising revenue. The hardware store owner promised free supplies for any home repairs. Even the gruff old diner manager, who had fired Grace weeks ago, came forward with tears in his eyes and offered her job back Pata with a raise. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice gruff with emotion. "I should have helped instead of judging." Grace hugged each person who approached, her gratitude evident in every thank you and trembling smile. Sammy sat at the counter, surrounded by other kids who shared their video games and traded stories about hospital stays and recovery. As the evening reached its peak, someone called for Eli to give a speech. He tried to decline, but the crowd wouldn't hear of it. Finally, with gentle nudging from Lucy, he stood on a chair and cleared his throat. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "but I want to tell you about kindness. A few weeks ago, I was standing right there at that register, feeling like the worst father in the world because I couldn't pay for my daughter's birthday dinner." He paused, looking at Grace. "And then this amazing woman, who had every reason to turn her back, showed me what true kindness looks like. She didn't just pay our bill, she gave me back my dignity. She did this while carrying burdens I couldn't imagine." The room grew quiet as Eli continued. "Tonight, I see that same kindness multiplied 100-fold. Look around. This is what community means. This is what hope looks like. And I want to thank each one of you for proving that miracles still happen right here in our little town." The applause was deafening. People wiped tears from their eyes and hugged their neighbors. The donation jars filled up and checks were written. By the end of the night, the preliminary count showed they'd raised over $50,000. Not nearly enough to cover the full medical bill, but a tremendous start. As the last guests began to leave, Eli sat at the counter, exhausted but happy. Lucy had fallen asleep in a booth, and Grace was saying goodbye to the remaining well-wishers. The night felt perfect, like a dream come true. Then his phone rang. "Mr. Harper?" The voice belonged to Tom Wilson, the bank manager who had helped set up the fundraiser account. "There's something wrong. I'm looking at the account activity, and all the money's gone. Someone accessed it electronically about an hour ago and transferred everything out." Eli's blood ran cold. The room seemed to spin as Tom's words sank in. "What do you mean, gone?" "Every penny, Mr. Harper. I'm so sorry." "We're looking into it now, but—" Tom's voice faded into background noise as Eli stared at the donation jars on the counter, still full of cash and checks that hadn't been deposited yet. Through the window, he could see Grace hugging Sammy, both of them smiling, still caught up in the joy of the evening. How could he tell her that their miracle had just been stolen? His hands trembled as he ended the call. The diner's neon sign cast a red glow through the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a haunting echo of his own internal alarm. Eli's hands trembled as he stared at his phone screen, refreshing the fundraiser page. The balance showing $50,000 hours ago now displayed 0. His throat went dry. "This can't be happening," he whispered, ducking into the diner's back office. The celebration from the dining room seemed distant, muffled by roaring in his ears. He dialed the bank's emergency number with shaking fingers. After endless automated menus, a representative answered. "I need to report unauthorized activity," Eli said, voice cracking. He explained the situation, pacing the small office. "I'm sorry, sir," the representative said after checking. "The funds were transferred electronically with correct credentials. We can't trace where the money went." Eli leaned against the wall, legs going weak. "But this was fundraiser money for a sick child. You'll need to file a police report. But in cases like this—" Eli barely heard the rest. Someone with account access had betrayed them all. Him, the diner manager, Grace's ex-boyfriend who'd helped coordinate. Lucy poked her head in. "Daddy, people are asking where you went." Eli forced a smile. "I'll be right there, sweetie." In the dining room, celebration continued. Grace stood near the counter with Sammy, both beaming. The sight made Eli's chest ache. The diner manager caught his eye, raising an eyebrow. Eli looked away, suspicions making him sick. He'd trusted these people. Grace noticed him standing alone and approached. "Eli, you look pale." He couldn't meet her eyes. "Grace, I need to tell you something. Can we talk privately?" Outside in the cool evening air, Grace hugged herself against the chill. "What's wrong?" "The money's gone," Eli whispered. Grace stared, uncomprehending. "What do you mean?" "Someone transferred it out. All of it. The bank can't trace it." The words felt like stones. "I'm sorry, Grace. I failed you." Grace's face cycled through confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally deep sadness. But how? Who would? "I don't know, but I'll find out. I'll make this right somehow." Grace slid down the wall until she sat on the curb. Eli stood helplessly. "All those people," she said hollowly. "They trusted us. They wanted to help Sammy." Tears streamed down her face. "What am I going to do?" Eli sat beside her. "I'll go to police tomorrow. We'll figure something out." Grace nodded, but the light had gone out of her eyes. Hope crushed, replaced by familiar despair. "I should get Sammy home," she said, standing. "Grace, it's not your fault, Eli," she said distantly. "You tried to help." She walked back inside, leaving Eli alone. Through the window, he watched her gather Sammy and make quiet goodbyes. Her shoulders slumped, movements mechanical. Eli stayed outside long after they'd gone, staring at stars and wondering how everything went so wrong. The night that should have been triumph had become another reminder of how quickly hope could slip away. Tomorrow would bring police reports and accusations, suspicious glances, and disappointed faces. But tonight, Eli sat in quiet darkness, feeling failure pressed down like a physical weight. He'd wanted desperately to help, to show Grace that kindness could change lives. Instead, he'd only added to her burden. The diner's lights clicked off, one by one. In his pocket, his phone felt heavy with knowledge, the empty account, stolen dreams, betrayed trust. He would face it all tomorrow, but tonight, he let himself feel the full measure of grief and shame. The morning light filtered through the diner's dusty windows as Grace paced back and forth, her worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. She'd gathered the handful of volunteers who'd helped organize the fundraiser, her eyes scanning their faces as they sat in the vinyl booths. "I need to know exactly who handled the money," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "Every single person." The diner manager, Martha, pulled out a crumpled list from her apron pocket. "I've got the names right here, honey." But honestly, only 3 people had access to the account itself. Grace's stomach churned as Martha read the names. When she mentioned Jake Peterson, Grace's ex-boyfriend and the fundraiser coordinator, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't wanted him involved, but he'd insisted on helping, claiming he'd changed. Eli stood in the corner, his shoulders slumped, looking like he carried the weight of the world. "I should have been more careful with who we trusted," he muttered. "No," Grace said firmly, turning to face him. "This isn't your fault." She pulled out her phone and showed him a text from Jake from the night before. "Look at this." He said he had to leave town unexpectedly for a family emergency. Eli's eyes narrowed. The same night the money disappeared? One of the volunteers, an elderly woman named Ruth, spoke up. "That Jake fellow, he was awful interested in how the online donation system worked. Kept asking about security measures." Grace felt her chest tighten. She remembered Jake's past. The petty theft charges, the con games he'd pulled before she'd known him. She'd believed him when he said he'd changed, wanted to give him a second chance. Now that trust felt like ashes in her mouth. "We need to check his apartment," Grace said, grabbing her purse. "He lived just 3 blocks from here." Eli hesitated. "Shouldn't we call the police first?" "With what evidence?" Grace asked. "We need something concrete." "Jake's smart. He won't have left an obvious trail." They drove to Jake's apartment in Eli's old pickup truck, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. The apartment complex was a shabby 2-story building with peeling paint and rusty railings. Grace still had a spare key from when they dated. Inside, the apartment was eerily neat, too neat. He cleared out, Grace said, moving from room to room. But he must have been in a hurry. Eli noticed something poking out from under the couch. He pulled out a wadded-up piece of paper and carefully smoothed it out. Grace, look at this. It was a printed receipt for a wire transfer, partially torn but still legible. The amount matched their missing funds exactly. Grace's hands shook as she took the paper. There's an account number here, and look, he used his real name. He must have thought he'd grabbed all the evidence. They found more, a hastily deleted browser history on his laptop that hadn't quite disappeared, emails about one-way flights to Mexico, and a notebook with scribbled account numbers that matched their fundraiser account. He didn't just steal from us, Eli said, flipping through the notebook. There are other accounts listed here, other victims. Grace sank onto the couch, her face pale. I should have known. The signs were all there. He showed up right when we started planning the fundraiser, suddenly wanting to help. You wanted to believe in someone's goodness, Eli said quietly. There's no shame in that. They gathered everything they could find, the receipt, the notebook, screenshots of the browser history. Grace's hands were steady now as she pulled out her phone and dialed the police. Yes, I'd like to report a theft, she said, her voice firm. We have evidence of wire fraud and stealing from a charity fundraiser. She gave them the address and hung up. They're sending someone right away. Eli touched her shoulder gently. You okay? Grace looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears but fierce with determination. No, but I will be. We'll make this right. They waited outside the apartment for the police, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. The evidence was secured in Grace's purse, and though the weight of their situation hadn't lifted, at least now they had hope and a direction to move forward. A police cruiser pulled up, its lights cutting through the growing dusk. Grace squared her shoulders and stepped forward to meet them, Eli right beside her, ready to share what they'd found. Blue and red lights flashed across Main Street as two police cruisers pulled up to the bus station. Grace stood beside Eli, her arms wrapped tightly around herself despite the warm morning air. They watched as officers rushed inside, their radios crackling with static and urgent voices. Minutes felt like hours, until finally, the glass doors burst open. Between two officers emerged James Turner, Grace's ex-boyfriend, his hands cuffed behind his back. His usually slick appearance was disheveled, wrinkled clothes, messy hair, and dark circles under his eyes. He'd been trying to skip town with a one-way ticket to Atlanta and the stolen fundraiser money stuffed in his duffel bag. I can't believe he actually did it, Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. Her fingers twisted the hem of her uniform shirt, knuckles white with tension. Eli noticed how the small crowd of onlookers began to whisper among themselves. Some pointed, others shook their heads, and a few even turned away when they caught his eye. The same people who'd patted him on the back just days ago now looked at him with doubt and suspicion. Mrs. Peterson from the quilting circle clutched her purse closer when Eli walked past. Tom from the hardware store suddenly became very interested in his phone. Even Pastor Roberts, who had praised Eli's efforts from the pulpit, only managed a weak nod before hurrying across the street. They still think I had something to do with it, Eli said quietly as they walked back to the diner. The morning rush had ended, leaving only a few regular customers nursing their coffee cups. Grace pulled out a chair at their usual table. Give them time, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. They'll come around once everything settles down. The coffee pot trembled slightly in Eli's hand as he poured them each a cup. The familiar routine felt wrong somehow, like trying to force normalcy into a world that had shifted beneath their feet. Lucy asked me this morning if we were bad people now, Eli admitted, staring into his coffee. How do I explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes good intentions aren't enough? Grace reached across the table, her hand stopping, just short of touching his. The gesture hung incomplete in the air between them, like so many things lately. You're a good man, Eli Harper. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. But doubt had already taken root. It showed in the way Eli's shoulders hunched when he walked down the street, in how he'd started taking the long way to avoid running into familiar faces. The weight of disappointed looks and whispered conversations pressed down on him like a physical thing. They sat in silence, the ceiling fan spinning lazily above them, casting rotating shadows across the worn tabletop. The distance between them seemed to grow with each passing minute, filled with words neither knew how to say. Grace broke the silence first. Sammy asked about you yesterday. He wanted to know why you haven't been by to help with his science project. Eli's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Maybe it's better if I keep my distance for a while. People are already talking enough as it is. So you're just going to disappear? There was an edge to Grace's voice he hadn't heard before. After everything? I'm trying to protect you, Eli said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Your reputation. My reputation? Grace pushed her coffee away untouched. The whole reason we're in this mess is because you wanted to help me, and now you're just giving up? Eli struggled to find the right words. I'm not giving up. I just don't want to make things worse. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Outside, life in their small town continued as if nothing had changed. The mailman made his rounds, Mrs. Johnson walked her poodle past the window, and somewhere a car horn honked in the distance. But inside the diner, the air grew thick with unspoken words and mounting frustration. Grace stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. I should get back to work. She smoothed her apron with trembling hands. Sammy has a doctor's appointment tomorrow. He'll be disappointed you won't be there. Eli watched her walk away, each step widening the gulf between them. He wanted to call out, to bridge the gap somehow, but pride and fear held his tongue. The coffee grew cold in front of him, forgotten like the dreams they'd shared just a week ago. Through the window, he could still see the police tape fluttering in the breeze outside the bus station. James Turner was headed to jail, but sometimes Eli wondered if they weren't all serving their own kind of sentence, trapped by assumptions, judgments, and the weight of broken trust. The diner's bell chimed as another customer walked in. Grace plastered on her professional smile, notepad ready, as if everything was normal, as if their world hadn't just been turned upside down. Eli stood up slowly, leaving enough money on the table to cover both coffees and a tip that was probably too generous. He paused at the door, looking back at Grace as she took another table's order. She didn't look up, and somehow that hurt more than any suspicious glance or whispered accusation. The bell chimed again as he stepped out into the morning sun, leaving behind more than just an unfinished cup of coffee. The morning sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows as Grace wiped down tables, her movements mechanical and distracted. The familiar rhythm of her work couldn't drown out the chaos in her mind. She looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and her heart skipped a beat as Eli walked in. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes matching her own. His usual confident stride was replaced by hesitant steps as he made his way to the counter. Grace set down her cleaning rag and walked over, pulling her notepad from her apron, more out of habit than necessity. Coffee? She asked, already reaching for a mug. Thanks, Eli replied softly, settling onto a stool. The diner was empty except for them, the morning rush long gone. Grace poured the coffee with trembling hands, spilling a few drops on the counter. She quickly wiped them away, but Eli caught her wrist gently. Grace, talk to me, please. She pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't even know where to start, Eli. Everything's such a mess. I know, he said, his voice heavy with understanding. Grace moved around the counter, settling onto the stool next to him. You've done so much for me and Sammy, more than anyone else ever has. She stared into her own reflection in the polished counter. But sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in all of this. The bills, Sammy's treatment, the fundraiser disaster, and now this thing between us. Eli turned to face her, his coffee forgotten. What thing between us? That's just it, Grace said, finally meeting his eyes. I don't know what this is. You came into my life like some kind of guardian angel, fighting battles I couldn't fight alone. And I'm so grateful, Eli. So grateful it hurts. Her voice cracked on the last word. But, Eli prompted gently, but I'm scared. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I'm scared of depending on someone again, of letting someone else carry my burdens. The last time I did that, she trailed off, thinking of James and his betrayal. I'm not James, Eli said firmly. I know that, Grace whispered. That's what makes this harder. You're good and kind and everything he wasn't, and I don't deserve any of it. I can never repay you for what you've done. Grace, I never expected. I know you didn't. She cut him off, standing up abruptly. That's what makes it worse. You did all this without expecting anything in return, and I still feel like I'm failing you somehow. She began pacing behind the counter, her hands fidgeting with her apron strings. Every time I look at you, I see everything I could lose. What if something goes wrong again? What if I mess this up too? I can't handle another disappointment. Sammy can't handle it. Eli stood up but remained on his side, at the counter, giving her space. Nobody's asking you to handle everything alone anymore. But that's exactly it. Grace's voice rose slightly, thick with emotion. I don't know how to not handle things alone anymore. It's all I've known for so long. She stopped pacing, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. Maybe I need some space to figure things out. The hurt that flashed across Eli's face made her heart ache, but she forced herself to continue. I need to focus on Sammy right now, on getting back on my feet. I can't. She took a shaky breath. I can't let myself depend on anyone else right now. It's not fair to you. Life isn't about what's fair, Eli said quietly. It's about what's right. And walking away when someone needs help isn't right. I'm not asking you to walk away, Grace said. I need some distance. Some time to think. Eli stepped closer to the counter, his eyes intense. You can have all the time you need, Grace. But I want you to know something. He waited until she looked at him again. I'm not giving up on you, or Sammy, no matter what. Grace felt tears threatening to spill over. She grabbed her purse from under the counter, needing to escape before she completely broke down. I have to go, she mumbled, hurrying toward the door. Jenny will be here soon for her shift. Grace, Eli called after her, but she didn't turn around. She pushed through the door, the bell's cheerful jingle, a stark contrast to the heaviness in her heart. The morning air was cool against her face as she walked quickly down the sidewalk, wiping away tears with trembling hands. Behind her, through the diner's window, she knew Eli was watching her go, and even though every step felt wrong, she kept walking. The morning after Grace pulled away, Eli sat at his kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. Lucy's cereal bowl from breakfast remained untouched. She'd barely spoken 2 words to him before heading to school. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual, pressing down on his shoulders like a physical weight. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the dozens of missed calls and unread messages. Some were from concerned church members, others from reporters wanting statements about the fundraiser scandal. Each notification felt like another small wound. What am I doing wrong? He whispered to the empty kitchen. His late wife's photo smiled at him from the wall, offering no answers. The sound of his ancient truck sputtering to life in the driveway caught his attention. His neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, had offered to drive Lucy to school this week. The gesture was kind, but it stung. Even his daughter preferred other people's company now. His phone buzzed again. This time it was the bank, warning of suspicious activity on his account. Eli's hands shook as he opened the message. More unauthorized transfers had been made using his information. His stomach churned as he realized someone was still using his details to move money around. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime a stark contrast to the dread building in his chest. Through the window, he saw 2 police cars parked outside. Officer Martinez, whom he'd known since high school, stood on his porch with another officer he didn't recognize. Eli Harper? Martinez's voice was professional, devoid of their usual friendly tone. We need you to come with us. What's going on, Mike? Eli asked, stepping onto the porch. New evidence has surfaced regarding the fundraiser funds, Martinez said, unable to meet his eyes. Multiple fraudulent transfers have been traced to your accounts. That's impossible, Eli protested. I've been reporting those transfers. Someone's using my information. We have to take you in for questioning, the other officer stated firmly. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. Eli's legs felt weak as reality crashed over him. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when Lucy was about to A. Small gasp made his heart stop. Lucy stood at the end of the driveway, her backpack clutched to her chest. Mrs. Thompson's car idled behind her, but Lucy seemed frozen in place, her eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Lucy, baby, it's okay. Eli called out, trying to keep his voice steady. This is just a misunderstanding. Everything's going to be fine. But Lucy's lower lip trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She took a step backward, shaking her head slowly. Daddy? Her voice cracked on the word, and Eli felt his heart shatter. I'm innocent, sweetie. You have to believe me. He struggled against the instinct to run to her, the handcuffs preventing him from reaching out to his daughter. Mrs. Thompson will take care of you until I get this sorted out. Mrs. Thompson hurried forward, placing protective hands on Lucy's shoulders. Come on, dear, she murmured, trying to guide Lucy back to the car. But he didn't do anything wrong. Lucy cried out, her voice rising in panic. Daddy wouldn't steal. He's good. He helps people. Lucy, please. Eli begged, his composure cracking as the officers began leading him toward the patrol car. "Be brave for me, okay? I love you so much." Lucy broke free from Mrs. Thompson's grip and ran forward, but Martinez stepped between them. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he said gently. "Your daddy has to come with us, right now." "No!" Lucy screamed, the sound piercing through the quiet morning air. "You're wrong. He's good. Daddy!" Eli closed his eyes, unable to watch as Mrs. Thompson gathered his sobbing daughter in her arms. The sound of Lucy's cries followed him as the officers guided him into the back of the patrol car. Through the window, he could see Lucy's small form crumpled against Mrs. Thompson, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The trust and admiration that had always shone in her eyes when she looked at him was gone, replaced by confusion and fear. This was exactly what he dreaded most, not just losing his freedom or his reputation, but losing his daughter's faith in him. The one person who had always believed in him, who had been his reason for getting up every morning since his wife died, now looked at him like a stranger. As the police car pulled away from the curb, Eli watched Lucy grow smaller in the rearview mirror. His daughter's broken expression burned into his memory, a visual representation of everything he'd failed to protect. The last thing he saw before they turned the corner was Lucy burying her face in Mrs. Thompson's skirt, unable to watch her father being taken away. In that moment, Eli felt something inside him break. The final thread of hope he'd been clinging to snapped like a dry twig. The patrol car wound its way through familiar streets that now felt alien and hostile. Neighbors who had once waved cheerfully stood in their yards, watching with judgment in their eyes. The town that had rallied around him just days ago now turned its back, and Eli Harper, the man who had tried to save everyone else, found himself utterly alone. The holding cell was barely big enough for Eli to pace in, though he'd worn a path across its concrete floor anyway. Cold fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the institutional green walls. His footsteps echoed off the bare surfaces, a lonely rhythm in the empty corridor. He sank onto the thin mattress of the metal cot, burying his face in his hands. The image of Lucy's face as they'd led him away in handcuffs haunted him, her eyes wide with disbelief, tears streaming down her cheeks. She'd reached for him, but Mrs. Thompson had held her back. "I've lost everything," Eli whispered to himself. His voice cracked with emotion. "My reputation, my daughter's trust, Grace's faith in me." The thought of Grace twisted like a knife in his chest. After everything they'd been through together, after all his efforts to help her, he'd ended up causing her more pain. The cell felt smaller with each passing minute. Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows through the narrow window, painting prison bar stripes across the floor. Eli watched them creep across the concrete, marking time like the world's most depressing sundial. A guard walked past, keys jingling at his belt. He barely glanced at Eli, as if he were just another piece of furniture in the cell. The sound of his boots faded away, leaving Eli alone with his thoughts again. "You've abandoned me, haven't you?" Eli looked up at the ceiling, addressing God for the first time in years. His voice was bitter, barely above a whisper. "I tried to do the right thing. I tried to help someone in need, and this is what I get?" The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. Eli closed his eyes, remembering the last conversation he'd had with his wife before she passed. They'd been sitting in her hospital room, the machines beeping softly in the background. She'd been so weak, but her eyes had burned with intensity. "Promise me something," she'd said, holding his hand. "Promise me you won't lose your faith when things get hard. Faith is believing there's light even when you're standing in the dark." The memory hit him like a physical blow. Here he was, literally and figuratively, in the dark, having abandoned that very promise. Tears welled up in his eyes as shame washed over him. Slowly, Eli slid from the cot onto his knees. His hands gripped the edge of the thin mattress as he bowed his head. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I forgot what she taught me. I forgot what you taught me." The words came hesitantly at first, like water trickling through a rusty pipe that hadn't been used in years. "Lord, I don't know if you're listening. I haven't exactly been the best at keeping in touch." He let out a shaky laugh that was half sob. "But I need you now, not just for me, but for Lucy, for Grace, for everyone who's been hurt by this mess." As he prayed, something shifted inside him. The knot of anger and bitterness in his chest began to loosen. Memories flooded back, of his wife's unwavering faith, of Grace's kindness at the diner, of Lucy's simple trust in him. Each memory felt like a small light pushing back the darkness. "I don't understand why this is happening," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "But Sarah was right. Faith isn't about understanding everything. It's about believing in the light, even when you can't see it." Time seemed to stop as Eli remained on his knees, pouring out years of buried grief and fear. He prayed for Lucy, that she wouldn't lose her own faith because of his situation. He prayed for Grace and Sammy, that they would find the help they needed. He even prayed for the person who had really stolen the money, that they might find redemption. When he finally opened his eyes, the cell was darker. Night had fallen while he prayed, but somehow the darkness didn't feel as oppressive anymore. Eli stood up, his knees stiff from kneeling so long, and sat back on the cot. For the first time since his arrest, his mind felt clear. He couldn't explain it, but deep in his heart, he knew this wasn't the end of his story. Whatever happened next, he would face it with faith, real faith, not just the hollow shell of belief he'd been carrying around since Sarah's death. His wife's words echoed in his mind again. Faith is believing there's light even when you're standing in the dark. A sense of peace settled over him, despite his circumstances. He might be in a cell, but his spirit felt freer than it had in years. Whatever tests lay ahead, he would face them with renewed strength and the faith he'd almost forgotten. Through the small window, Eli could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Each one seemed to remind him that even in the darkest night, light always found a way to shine through. Grace's hands trembled as she stared at the computer screen in the police station. Detective Morris had just pulled up the security footage from the bank, and there he was, Mark, her ex-boyfriend, making multiple withdrawals from the fundraiser account. The timestamp matched perfectly with when the money had disappeared. "That's him," Grace whispered, her voice catching. "That's Mark." She watched as he made transaction after transaction, emptying the account that held so many people's hopes and dreams for her son's treatment. Detective Morris leaned forward, his weathered face serious. "We found bus tickets in his apartment. Looks like he was planning to leave town tonight." Grace's chest tightened. All this time, while Eli sat in a jail cell, Mark had been plotting his escape. The betrayal cut deep, but not as deep as the guilt she felt for not seeing it sooner. "We need to get Eli out," she said, standing up suddenly. "He's innocent. He's been innocent this whole time." The detective nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll call the DA right now. With this evidence, we should be able to get the charges dropped immediately." Grace paced the small office while Detective Morris made his calls. Her mind raced through the past few weeks. Eli's tireless work organizing the fundraiser, his genuine desire to help her and Sammy, the look of devastation on his face when he was arrested. She had to make this right. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and procedures. Grace refused to leave the station until she knew Eli would be released. She gave her statement, signed documents, and answered endless questions about Mark and his involvement. Finally, around sunset, she heard the sound she'd been waiting for. Footsteps coming down the corridor. Eli appeared, looking tired but relieved, his eyes finding hers immediately. "Grace?" he said softly, as if he couldn't quite believe she was there. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against his shoulder. "I should have known it was Mark. I should have fought harder for you." Eli pulled back slightly, his eyes kind despite everything he'd been through. "You did fight for me. You found the truth." The police chief cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Mr. Harper, on behalf of the department, I want to extend our sincerest apologies. We should have investigated more thoroughly before making the arrest." Eli nodded, but Grace could see the toll the ordeal had taken on him. His shoulders were slumped, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The next morning, the town hall was packed. The mayor had called an emergency meeting to address the situation. Grace sat next to Eli in the front row, her hand occasionally brushing his for reassurance. Mayor Thompson stood at the podium, his usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine remorse. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to right a grave wrong. One of our own, Eli Harper, was falsely accused and imprisoned for a crime he did not commit." The room fell silent as the mayor continued, detailing how Eli had worked tirelessly to help Grace and her son, only to be betrayed by someone they trusted. He explained how Mark had been caught trying to flee with the stolen money, which had now been recovered. "Mr. Harper," the mayor said, turning to face Eli directly, "we owe you more than just an apology. We owe you our gratitude for showing us what true community spirit looks like, and we owe you our shame for doubting your character." One by one, community members stood up to apologize. The diner owner who had first doubted him, the church members who had turned away, even some of the police officers who had arrested him. Grace watched as Eli accepted each apology with grace and humility, though she could see the emotion in his eyes. When the last person had spoken, Eli stood slowly. "I appreciate everyone's words today," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "But this was never about me. It was about helping someone in need, and that hasn't changed." He turned to Grace, and she felt tears welling up in her eyes. "The money's been recovered," he continued, "which means we can still help Grace and Sammy. That's what matters." The room erupted in applause, but Grace barely heard it. She was looking at Eli, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time, not just as someone who had tried to help her, but as someone who had changed her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. After the meeting, they stood together outside the town hall. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming dogwoods. "I don't know how to thank you," Grace said softly. "After everything that happened, you're still thinking about helping us." Eli smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in days. "Remember what you wrote on that note? Kindness has no price tag." Grace felt her heart swell with emotion. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're an amazing man, Eli Harper." He squeezed back, and in that moment, they both knew their bond had grown stronger through the ordeal. They had weathered the storm together, and something beautiful had emerged from the darkness. Sunlight streamed through the freshly cleaned windows of the diner, casting warm patches across the checkered floor. Eli stood near the entrance, his hands in his pockets, taking in the familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked pie. The place looked different now, brighter somehow, despite being the same old building where his journey with Grace had begun. Mr. Johnson, the diner's owner, sat across from him in one of the worn leather booths, a stack of papers between them. "We need someone who understands this place," the older man said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Someone who knows what it means to the community. And after everything that's happened, well," he slid the papers toward Eli, "I can't think of anyone better to manage it." Eli's throat tightened as he looked at the contract. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Mr. Johnson smiled. "The pay's good, and you'll have full authority to run things your way." He paused, his expression softening. "Plus, I hear you've got some bills to take care of." The recovered fundraiser money sat in a secure account now, waiting to be put to its intended use. Eli nodded, emotion welling up inside him. "Thank you," he managed. "I won't let you down." Later that afternoon, Eli sat with Grace in her small trailer, going through the hospital paperwork together. Lucy and Sammy played outside, their laughter drifting through the open window. Grace's hand shook slightly as she signed the final document. "It doesn't feel real," she whispered, looking at the papers that would finally clear her son's medical debt. "After everything." Eli reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's real. You don't have to carry this burden anymore." Grace's eyes met his, filled with tears and something else, something warm and tender that made Eli's heart skip. "We couldn't have done this without you," she said softly. "You're the one who started it all," Eli reminded her. "That day in the diner, when you paid for our meal?" She smiled, and the moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Finally, Eli cleared his throat. "Speaking of the diner, Mr. Johnson offered me the manager position." Grace's face lit up. "Eli, that's wonderful." "I was hoping," he said carefully, "that you might want to come back. Not as a waitress this time, as my partner, running the place together." The word partner hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than just business. Grace's cheeks flushed slightly as she nodded. "I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable rhythm working together. The diner became their shared project, a symbol of renewal. They repainted the walls, fixed the wobbly tables, and added fresh flowers to each booth. But, more than the physical changes, the spirit of the place transformed. Regular customers noticed how Eli and Grace moved around each other with an easy familiarity, how their eyes met across the room in quiet moments, how their hands brushed when passing orders. They saw how Lucy and Sammy had become inseparable, creating artwork for the walls and doing homework together in the corner booth after school. One quiet evening, as they were closing up, Grace found Eli standing by the register, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "I was just thinking about that first night," he said. "When my card was declined, I felt so broken, like I'd failed at everything." Grace slipped her hand into his. "And now?" Eli turned to face her, his eyes soft. "Now, I understand that sometimes being broken is how the light gets in." He paused, gathering courage. "Grace, I know," she whispered, stepping closer. "Me too." Their first kiss was gentle, a quiet acknowledgement of everything they'd been through together and everything that lay ahead. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. The next morning, Eli arrived early at the diner. He pulled out a fresh paintbrush and carefully began writing on the wall behind the counter. The golden letters gleamed in the morning light. "Your bill is $1 million, and it's already paid in full." He stepped back, remembering Grace's whispered words that had changed everything. The phrase meant something different now, not just about money or debt, but about the priceless gifts of love, faith, and second chances. Grace appeared beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. Together, they stood in silence, watching the sunrise paint the words in warm light. The diner would open soon, ready to welcome anyone who needed a reminder that kindness had no price tag, and that even the biggest debts could be paid with love. The gentle chime of the door announced the day's first customers, and Eli and Grace turned to greet them together, ready to pass on the gift that had brought them to this moment. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink as Eli Harper stood outside the diner, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The evening breeze carried the scent of magnolia blossoms, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed. He closed his eyes, letting the peaceful moment wash over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, his shoulders weren't heavy with worry. The worn sign above the diner creaked gently in the wind. Soon, they'd replace it with a new one reading Grace's Table. But for now, it remained a reminder of where everything had started. Eli smiled, remembering that first night when his debit card was declined, and how that moment of shame had transformed into something beautiful. He thought back to those dark days after losing his wife, when every morning felt like climbing a mountain with Lucy depending on him to make it to the top. The endless shifts, the tight budgets, the forced smiles when Lucy asked for things he couldn't afford. And then there was Grace, appearing like an angel in a worn waitress uniform, whispering those words that would change everything. "Your bill is $1 million, sir, but it's already paid in full." The memory brought warmth to his chest. Who could have known that a simple act of kindness would spiral into such a profound journey? He remembered the shock of finding Grace's hospital bill in his mailbox, the determination that had filled him despite his own empty pockets. The community rallying together, the fundraiser that seemed to answer all their prayers, and then the bitter betrayal that followed. Eli's hand unconsciously moved to his chest, where the weight of those accusations had once sat like a stone. The arrest, Lucy's frightened face as they led him away, the cold cement walls of the holding cell, it all felt like a distant nightmare now. But even in those darkest moments, Grace had never given up on him. She'd fought to prove his innocence, just as he had fought to help her when she needed it most. A gentle rustling beside him drew his attention. Grace stood there, her hand holding Sammy's, both of them bathed in the golden light of sunset. Sammy looked stronger now, his cheeks fuller, his eyes brighter. The treatments were working, and though they still had a long road ahead, hope had replaced fear in their lives. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Grace asked, her voice soft and warm like honey. Eli shook his head, smiling. "Just thinking about million-dollar bills and guardian angels in aprons?" Grace laughed, the sound carrying on the evening breeze. Sammy looked between them, grinning. He understood more than they gave him credit for, the way love could heal, how kindness could multiply, how faith could move mountains. "The evening rush will be starting soon," Grace said, squeezing Sammy's hand. "Ready to head back in?" Eli nodded, taking one last look at the sunset. The diner behind them hummed with activity. The clink of dishes, the murmur of voices, the smell of fresh coffee. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It had become a sanctuary of second chances, a place where broken people could find healing. Together, they walked toward the entrance. The bell above the door chimed as they stepped inside, welcomed by the warmth and light. The walls that had once witnessed his humiliation now held stories of redemption. The counter where Grace had first shown him kindness now served as a gathering place for others in need. Lucy sat at their usual booth, homework spread across the table, her tongue stuck out in concentration as she worked on her math problems. She looked up as they entered, her face breaking into a wide smile that reminded Eli so much of her mother. She had grown stronger through all of this too, learning lessons about faith and perseverance that most children her age never had to face. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Eli felt Grace's hand slip into his, a gentle reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. They had all been through the fire and come out stronger, not just survivors, but healers, each carrying their own scars, yet choosing to believe in the power of love and second chances. Sammy tugged at their hands, eager to join Lucy at the booth. His energy was returning day by day, and with it, the simple joy of being a kid again. The worried crease that had lived between Grace's brows for so long had finally begun to fade, replaced by laugh lines that spoke of newfound happiness. They stood there for a moment, taking in the scene before them. The future still held uncertainties. Medical bills would need to be paid, challenges would arise, and life would continue to test their faith. But something fundamental had changed. The burden of facing it alone had lifted, replaced by the strength they found in each other. The diner buzzed with life around them, a testament to the power of community and compassion. Regular customers nodded in greeting, each one having played their part in the story that had unfolded here. The walls seemed to hold echoes of prayers answered and hearts healed, of kindness given and received. Morning sunlight streamed through the diner's clean windows, casting warm rectangles across the checkered floor. Eli wiped the counter, admiring how the chrome fixtures gleamed. The place had come alive beyond his imagination. The worn booths were reupholstered, walls freshly painted, but the real change was the spirit. Grace emerged from the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, face glowing. "Morning bread's almost done," she said, sliding beside him. "Mrs. Henderson's bringing her church group for breakfast." Eli smiled. "Third church group this week? We might need reservations." Who would have thought? Grace leaned against the counter. Remember when this place was dead quiet? The diner had become more than a restaurant. Every surface held memories. The booth where they'd met, the register where his card was declined, the wall where he'd written those life-changing words. "Your bill is $1 million, and it's already paid in full." Through the window, Sammy sat at an outdoor table, healthy and bright, helping Lucy with homework. His recovery was miraculous. "The foundation approved 3 more families yesterday," Grace said softly. "The Matthews little girl starts treatments next week." Eli squeezed her hand. The paid-in-full foundation had started small but grown beyond their dreams. Local businesses joined in, matching donations. One act of kindness had rippled across their community. "I've been thinking," Eli said. "What if we expanded the free meal program, weekly instead of monthly? Elderly folks need community, not just food." Grace's eyes lit up. "Sunday supper club? Get high school students to help serve?" "Exactly." Eli grabbed a notepad, jotting ideas. "Coordinate with churches, set up transportation for folks who can't drive. And music, Mr. Johnson could play piano. He's been looking for somewhere to perform." They brainstormed excitedly as the breakfast rush began. Regular customers entered, greeted by name, their orders already being prepared. Mrs. Peterson settled into her window booth. "You've done something special here," she called out. "This isn't just a diner anymore. It's home." Lucy bounded in, Sammy following. She clutched a paper, vibrating with excitement. "Daddy, Grace, look what I made." She spread her drawing on the corner booth table. Eli and Grace peered over her shoulder at the colorful artwork. She'd drawn the diner glowing with warmth, surrounded by people of all ages. Hearts floated overhead, and across the top she'd written, "Our family." "See?" Lucy pointed to figures. "That's us, Mrs. Peterson, the Sunday Supper Club, and Sammy teaching kids chess." Eli's throat tightened. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Lucy beamed. "We're not just a family anymore, Daddy. We're a team." She gestured to include Grace and Sammy. Grace wiped her eyes. The kitchen timer announced the bread was done, but the feeling lingered. That profound sense of belonging. "I'll help with the bread," Sammy offered, following Grace. His steps were strong, so different from his hospital days. Eli watched them go, then turned to Lucy, adding details to her drawing. The morning sun caught her hair, reminding him of her mother. Where that thought once brought pain, now it carried gentle warmth. She would be proud. "Can we hang it on the wall?" Lucy asked, "right next to your sign?" "Of course," Eli replied, already thinking about the perfect frame. The breakfast rush filled the diner with conversation and clinking silverware. Regular customers greeted each other like family, sharing news across tables. Fresh bread's aroma mingled with coffee and bacon. Eli returned to the counter, watching Grace emerge with warm bread. Sammy trailing with butter and jam. Lucy tucked her drawing away, then joined them, eager to help serve their extended family. This was their legacy, not just a business, but a beacon of hope. A place where kindness multiplied and nobody faced struggles alone. Where one simple act of grace sparked a chain reaction that continued touching lives in unimaginable ways. The bell above the diner's door chimed, and Eli looked up from the register. His hands froze mid-count as Jake Fisher stepped inside. The man who had once carried himself with such confidence now slouched. His clothes wrinkled and his face weathered. Dark circles under his eyes told a story of sleepless nights. The breakfast rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. The clinking of dishes from the kitchen stopped as Grace peered through the service window, her breath catching at the sight of her ex-boyfriend. Eli's protective instincts kicked in. He moved around the counter, positioning himself between Jake and the kitchen. "Can I help you?" His voice was steady but guarded. Jake raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," he said, his voice hoarse. I need to talk to both of you." Eli glanced toward the kitchen. Grace gave a small nod, though her lips were pressed into a thin line. Eli gestured to an empty booth in the corner, far from the other customers. "Have a seat." Jake slid into the booth, his shoulders hunched. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The swagger that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like shame. Grace emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood beside Eli, maintaining a careful distance from Jake. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone measured. "I've been trying to make things right," Jake began, his fingers fidgeting with a paper napkin. "After what I did, after prison, I had a lot of time to think." He swallowed hard. "I heard about your foundation, Grace, the work you're doing for families, dealing with medical bills." Eli felt Grace tense beside him. The foundation, paid in full, had become her mission, helping families navigate the crushing weight of medical debt. It was everything Jake had nearly destroyed with his theft. "I'm not here asking for forgiveness," Jake continued, his voice cracking. "I don't deserve it, but I want to help. Maybe volunteer at the diner or the foundation. Do something good for once in my life." Grace crossed her arms. "Why should we trust you?" Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. "These are my NA chips," he said, referring to Narcotics Anonymous. 6 months clean. "I'm also seeing a counselor twice a week." He laid the envelope on the table, but didn't push it forward. "I understand if you say no, but I needed you both to know how sorry I am." Eli studied the man before him. He remembered the anger he'd felt when Jake had stolen the fundraiser money, the betrayal that had cut so deep. But there was something different in Jake's eyes now, a rawness, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "What made you change?" Eli asked quietly. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "In prison, I met this old man. He was dying of cancer, no family left. But he spent his last months teaching other inmates to read." Jake's voice grew thick. "He told me that redemption isn't about erasing what you did wrong. It's about choosing to do right, even when it's hard." Grace pulled up a chair, sitting down slowly. "And you think helping at the diner will redeem you?" "No," Jake shook his head. "I know it won't erase what I did, but maybe it's a start." The three sat in silence for a moment, the usual diner sounds fading into the background. Through the window, morning sunlight cast long shadows across their table, like bars that separated their past from whatever future lay ahead. Finally, Grace spoke. "You can volunteer 2 hours a week to start. But you'll be washing dishes and you won't handle any money." Her voice was firm. "One wrong move and you're done." Relief flooded Jake's face. "Thank you," he whispered. "I won't let you down. Not this time." Eli stood up, extending his hand toward Jake. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of possibility, the chance for change, for redemption. Jake stared at the offered hand for a moment before taking it, his grip firm but humble. As Jake rose to leave, a tear slipped down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, nodding to both of them before turning toward the door. The bell chimed again as he stepped out into the morning light, his shoulders straighter than when he'd entered, carrying the gift of a second chance. Grace moved closer to Eli, their shoulders touching. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Eli replied honestly, "but I remember what it's like to need a second chance." They watched through the window as Jake walked away, his figure growing smaller against the backdrop of their small town. The diner hummed back to life around them, coffee brewing, plates clinking, regulars chatting, a reminder that life moved forward, even after the hardest moments. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the dusty road as Eli's truck wound its way through the familiar streets of their small southern town. Grace sat beside him, a folder of paperwork from the foundation balanced on her lap, while Lucy and Sammy chatted animatedly in the back seat. The children had become as close as siblings over the past months, their bond strengthening alongside their parents. "First stop is the Martinez family," Grace said, checking her notes. "Remember them, Eli?" Maria's husband lost his job right when their youngest needed surgery. Eli nodded, his hands steady on the wheel. "Hard to forget. They were our first foundation case after we got everything official." The Martinez home was modest but well kept, with cheerful flowers dotting the front yard. Before they could even reach the front door, Maria burst out, her arms wide open. "Mi familia," she called out, embracing first Grace, then Eli. Her eyes were bright with tears. "Look at you all. Come in, come in." Inside, the house smelled of fresh-baked bread and coffee. Maria's husband, Roberto, sat at the kitchen table, their youngest daughter, Carmen, perched on his lap. The little girl's surgical scar was barely visible now, just a thin line above her collar. "We can never thank you enough," Roberto said, standing to shake Eli's hand. "What you did for us. It saved our family." Lucy and Sammy quickly disappeared into the backyard with Carmen and her siblings, their laughter floating through the open windows. Grace and Eli spent an hour with the Martinez family, catching up on their progress and making sure they had everything they needed. As they visited more families throughout the day, each stop brought its own wave of emotions. The Wilsons, whose grandmother needed emergency heart surgery, the Johnson twins, who'd both required physical therapy after a car accident, the elderly Mr. Peterson, who'd lost his wife and needed help with medical bills. At each home, they were welcomed like family. Children ran to hug Lucy and Sammy, parents shared proud updates about their recovery, and every single person had a story about how the foundation had changed their lives. During a quiet moment between visits, Grace reached over and squeezed Eli's hand. "Can you believe all this?" she asked softly. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure it's real." Eli glanced at her, noting how the afternoon light caught the silver strands in her hair. "What do you mean?" "Just." Grace gestured at the folder in her lap, filled with success stories. "All of this? When I was at my lowest, working at the diner and drowning in Sammy's medical bills, I never could have imagined this, not in my wildest dreams." "Me neither," Eli admitted. "That day, my card got declined. I thought it was rock bottom. Turns out it was just the beginning." "Funny how that works, isn't it?" Grace smiled. "One small act of kindness, that's all it took to start this whole thing rolling." "And it just keeps rolling," Eli added. "Every person we help ends up helping someone else. It's like dropping a pebble in a pond. The ripples just keep going." Their last visit of the day was to the Hendersons, an elderly couple who'd been among their first supporters. Martha Henderson met them at the door with her characteristic warm smile, her husband George waving from his recliner. "Oh, you're all just in time," Martha exclaimed. "I've got a pot roast in the oven that's entirely too big for just George and me. You'll stay for dinner, won't you?" Before they could politely decline, George called out, "Don't you dare say no. Martha's been cooking all day, hoping you'd stop by." The Hendersons' small dining room was cramped with the 6 of them, but nobody minded. Martha's pot roast was tender and flavorful, served with mashed potatoes and green beans from their garden. Lucy helped pass the rolls, while Sammy insisted on refilling everyone's water glasses. "Remember when you first came to us about starting the foundation?" George asked, cutting into his roast. "Martha and I thought you were crazy, trying to help others when you both had your own struggles." Martha nodded, reaching for her husband's hand. "But that's exactly why it worked. You understood what people were going through. You knew what it was like to need help and be too proud to ask for it. The foundations helped more than just the folks who needed medical care," George continued. "It's brought the whole town together, given us all something to believe in again." Eli looked around the table, at Lucy and Sammy giggling over some private joke, at Grace discussing recipe tips with Martha, at George's weathered face filled with contentment. This wasn't just about business or charity anymore. This was family, In the broadest, most beautiful sense of the word, the meal was simple, but every bite seemed filled with meaning. When Martha brought out a homemade apple pie for dessert, Sammy declared it was better than any medicine he'd ever taken, making everyone laugh. As they helped clear the dishes, Eli felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. The foundation might have started with a declined credit card and an act of kindness, but it had grown into something far more precious, a community bound together by love, support, and the simple belief that everyone deserves a second chance. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. The coffee maker hummed softly in the background as Eli wiped down the last of the tables, his movements slow and methodical. Grace sat at the counter, surrounded by papers and documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. "That's the last of them," Eli said, hanging the damp cloth on its hook. He pulled up a stool next to Grace, his shoulders relaxing as he settled in beside her. "What's on your mind?" "You've been staring at those papers all evening." Grace pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture Eli had come to recognize as a sign of her uncertainty. "I received an interesting call today," she began, sliding an official-looking letter toward him. "The National Medical Aid Foundation wants to partner with us. They want to take our program nationwide." Eli's eyes widened as he scanned the letter. The numbers made his head spin, funding that could help thousands of families, resources beyond anything they'd imagined when they'd started their small foundation. "This is incredible," he said softly, looking up at Grace. Her expression remained troubled. "But you don't seem too excited about it." Grace stood up and walked to the window, watching as the streetlights flickered on one by one. "It's an amazing opportunity," she admitted, "the kind that could help so many people." She turned back to face Eli. "But it would mean traveling, speaking at conferences, managing teams across the country. I'd have to leave the diner, and Sammy would have to switch schools." Eli joined her at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass. "Whatever you decide, I'm here for you," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've built something beautiful here, Grace. If you want to share that with more people, I'll support you every step of the way." Grace leaned against him slightly, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "What about you, Eli? What do you want?" He chuckled softly, thinking about how different his life was now from just a year ago. "Honestly, I'm happy right here, running the diner, helping our neighbors, watching Lucy grow up." He gestured around the room. "This place isn't just a business anymore, it's home. Every person who walks through that door has a story, and we get to be part of it." "Tell me more," Grace said, moving back to the counter and patting the stool beside her. Eli sat down, his eyes distant as he gathered his thoughts. "You remember Mrs. Johnson? She comes in every Tuesday morning, orders the same breakfast, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no butter. Her husband passed away 6 months ago, and sometimes I think we're the only people she talks to all week." He smiled softly. "Or Tommy, the high school kid who busses tables on weekends. He's saving up for college, and every time he gets a good grade, we put it up on the bulletin board." Grace nodded, her own expression warming. "And Sarah with her 3 kids." "Exactly," Eli continued. "We know their stories, their struggles, their victories. When they need help, they know where to find it. That means something to me." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "But that doesn't mean you have to feel the same way. Your foundation could do amazing things on a bigger scale." Grace was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the National Foundation's letter. "You know what I love most about what we do here?" she finally said. "When someone comes in looking lost, like I was that day you came to find me, we can look them in the eye and say, 'We understand. We've been there.'" She stood up suddenly, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "I think I know what I want to do." She pulled out a pen and began writing on a blank piece of paper. "The National Foundation is offering resources, so let's use them. We can partner with them to strengthen our local program, maybe even expand to neighboring towns. But our heart stays here." Eli watched as she wrote, her excitement growing with each word. "We could set up a network of local foundations," she continued, "each one rooted in its own community. Share resources, share knowledge, but keep the personal connection." "That sounds perfect," Eli said, his pride evident in his voice. "Just like you." Grace blushed slightly, but kept writing. "We've built something special here, Eli. Something that works because we know our community, because we care about each person who walks through that door." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with purpose. "I don't want to be a CEO in some big city. I want to be right here, doing what we do best. Eli stood and walked around the counter, pulling Grace into a warm embrace. She melted into his arms, the tension of decision-making finally leaving her shoulders. Through the window, they could see the familiar lights of their small town, each one representing a family they knew, a story they shared. "You know what Lucy told me the other day?" Eli murmured into Grace's hair. "She said this place feels like magic because we make people's problems smaller just by listening to them." Grace laughed softly. "That girl is wise beyond her years. She gets that from hanging around you too much," Eli teased. They stood there in comfortable silence, the quiet hum of the diner's appliances, a familiar lullaby. Tomorrow, Grace would write her response to the National Foundation, proposing her alternative plan. Tomorrow, they would continue their work, one family at a time, one story at a time. But for now, they simply held each other, secure in the knowledge that they had found their path together. The diner buzzed with activity as colorful streamers and balloons transformed the humble space into something magical. A hand-painted banner stretched across the front window, reading "1 year of kindness," its letters carefully drawn by Lucy and Sammy, who now stood on chairs, hanging paper hearts from the ceiling. "A little to the left, Sammy," Lucy directed, her pigtails bouncing as she pointed. "That's perfect." Grace watched the children from behind the counter, her heart full at the sight of their easy friendship. Sammy's cheeks had a healthy glow these days, and his laughter filled the diner more often than not. She caught Eli's eye across the room, and they shared a knowing smile. "Mrs. Thompson's bringing her famous peach cobbler," Eli announced, checking his phone. "And Pastor Mike says the whole congregation's coming." The bell above the door chimed as volunteers streamed in, carrying trays of food and stacking wrapped gifts on a designated table. Each present would go to a family in need, a tradition that had started with Grace's simple act of kindness a year ago. "Look what I found in storage," Jake called out, emerging from the back with a dusty box. Since his return and redemption, he'd become an integral part of their extended family. He pulled out an old camera, grinning. "We should document this." The afternoon sun painted everything in warm, golden light as more people arrived. The parking lot filled with cars, and the sidewalk bustled with familiar faces. Old Mrs. Jenkins, who'd been their first regular customer after the reopening, settled into her usual booth with a contented sigh. The Martinez family, whom they'd helped through a difficult winter, brought homemade tamales. Even the town mayor showed up, his usual formal demeanor softened by the festive atmosphere. Lucy tugged at Eli's sleeve. "Daddy, can I show everyone my surprise now?" Eli nodded, and Lucy scrambled onto a chair, waving a large piece of paper. "I drew our family tree," she announced proudly. "See, there's Daddy and me, and Grace and Sammy, and all of you." She pointed to dozens of branches extending outward, each containing carefully drawn faces of community members. Sammy joined her, holding up his own contribution, a jar filled with folded papers. "And these are all the stories people wrote about how the diner helped them," he explained, his voice strong and clear. The crowd gathered closer, and Eli felt Grace's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently before stepping forward to address the room. The conversations hushed, and all eyes turned to him. "A year ago," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I stood in this very spot, completely broken. I couldn't pay for my daughter's birthday meal." He paused, meeting Grace's eyes. "But someone showed me that kindness doesn't have a price tag." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "That day changed everything," Eli continued. "Not just because of the act itself, but because it reminded me that faith isn't about waiting for miracles. It's about becoming one for somebody else." He gestured to the walls around them, now covered in photos of countless meals served, hands held, and lives touched. "Every person in this room has been part of that miracle." The audience nodded, some wiping away tears. "We've seen redemption," Eli said, glancing at Jake, who stood quietly in the corner. "We've witnessed healing." He smiled at Sammy. "And we've learned that when we open our hearts to others, there's no such thing as a stranger anymore." Grace stepped forward then, standing beside him. "What started as one small act of kindness has grown into something bigger than all of us," she added. "This diner isn't just a restaurant, it's proof that love multiplies when we share it." The room erupted in applause, and soon everyone was sharing stories, hugging, and celebrating. Lucy and Sammy darted between tables, distributing slices of cake and collecting more stories for their jar. The afternoon stretched into evening, filled with laughter and music as someone brought out a guitar. As the celebration continued around them, Eli and Grace slipped outside for a moment of quiet. They stood in the same spot where, a year ago, she had found him broken and defeated. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and a gentle breeze carried the sound of joy from inside. "Look at them all," Grace whispered, watching through the window as their extended family celebrated inside. All these lives intertwined because of one moment of kindness. Eli wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We've done it," he whispered. "We've built something good." Grace nodded, her eyes shining with pride and unshed tears. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their community thrive, understanding that sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with fanfare. They build slowly, one act of kindness at a time, until suddenly you look around and realize your whole world has changed for the better. Inside, Lucy's laughter mingled with Sammy's, and the sound of their joy was sweeter than any music. The diner glowed like a beacon in the growing dusk, its windows warm with light, and its walls echoing with the sound of 100 conversations, 100 connections, 100 moments of grace. The autumn evening cast long shadows through the kitchen windows of Eli and Grace's home, painting warm stripes across their dinner table. The smell of fresh-baked cornbread and Grace's famous chicken stew filled the air, making the modest house feel even cozier than usual. Eli couldn't help but smile as he watched Lucy help Sammy set the table, their movements now comfortable and familiar after months of sharing meals together. "Careful with those glasses, sweetheart," Grace called out softly as Lucy balanced 2 water glasses in her small hands. The little girl's tongue poked out in concentration as she placed them carefully on the table, beaming with pride when she managed not to spill a drop. "I've got it, Mom," Lucy replied, the word Mom rolling off her tongue naturally now. It had taken time, but the transition had been as smooth as anyone could hope for. Eli's heart swelled every time he heard it. They settled into their usual spots around the oak table, its surface marked with tiny nicks and scratches that told the story of countless shared meals and conversations. Grace reached for Eli's hand, and Lucy grabbed Sammy's, forming their familiar prayer circle. After saying, "Grace," they began passing dishes around, the routine comfortable and warm. Eli watched as Grace ladled extra stew into Sammy's bowl. His appetite had improved significantly since his recovery, and it was still a joy to see him eat with such enthusiasm. "So," Grace started, her eyes meeting Eli's across the table, "your father and I have something we'd like to discuss with both of you." Lucy perked up immediately, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "Is it about the adoption?" she asked, practically bouncing in her seat. "Sarah at school said her family adopted her little brother, and she said it was the best thing ever." Eli chuckled, sharing a knowing look with Grace. They'd been discussing this possibility for weeks, carefully considering how it would affect their family dynamic. "Yes, sweetheart. We've been thinking about opening our hearts and home to another child who needs a family. We've been blessed with so much love in this family," Grace added, reaching over to squeeze Sammy's hand, "and we think we have more to share." Sammy, who had been quietly eating his stew, looked up with thoughtful eyes. "Will they be younger or older than me?" he asked, his voice curious rather than concerned. "Well," Grace responded, "we've been talking with the adoption agency about a 7-year-old boy named Michael. He's been in foster care for a while now, and he needs a forever home." Lucy's eyes widened with excitement. "That's only a year younger than me. Can I show him all my favorite spots at the park? And maybe he could come to my art class." "Slow down there, birthday girl," Eli laughed, using his old nickname for her. "First, we need to make sure everyone's comfortable with this change. It's a big decision for our family." "I think it would be amazing," Sammy said quietly, but with conviction. "Remember when you and Mom got married, Eli? I was scared at first, but now I can't imagine our family any other way. Maybe Michael needs that too, to see that families can grow and change and still be perfect." Grace's eyes misted over at her son's words, and Eli had to clear his throat before he could speak. "That's exactly right, buddy. And we want both of you to be part of this process. We'd all meet Michael several times before making any decisions." "Can we make his room really special?" Lucy asked, her mind already racing ahead. "I still have some of my old stuffed animals he might like, and maybe we could paint the walls his favorite color." "Those are wonderful ideas." Grace smiled, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind Lucy's ear. "But remember, it might take some time for Michael to feel comfortable here. We'll need to be patient and understanding, just like we were when we were all getting used to being a family." The conversation flowed easily after that. with both children sharing their hopes and ideas for welcoming a new sibling. Lucy talked about teaching Michael all her secret hideouts in the backyard, while Sammy suggested they could all play basketball together in the driveway. As Eli watched his family dream and plan together, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The kitchen, with its warm yellow walls and slightly mismatched chairs, had become the heart of their home. Photos covered the refrigerator, snapshots of their wedding, the kids at the diner's anniversary celebration, family picnics, and everyday moments that had become precious memories. The sound of laughter pulled him back to the present as Lucy demonstrated how she would show Michael her special handshake that she'd invented. Sammy was trying to follow along, his fingers tangling as he attempted to match her movements, while Grace watched them both with pure joy written across her face. "And we can all go to the diner together," Lucy continued, her enthusiasm unstoppable. "He can try your famous pancakes, Mom, and maybe help Dad write the special message on the board." "That's right," Eli nodded, remembering how that simple message, "Your bill is $1 million and it's already paid in full," had changed all their lives. "We'll show him that there's always room for more love at our table." As they finished their meal, the conversation continued to flow naturally between them, punctuated by laughter and excited planning. The evening light had faded to a soft purple outside their windows, and the kitchen felt like a warm bubble of happiness. Grace started collecting plates, but Eli gently touched her arm. "Leave them for now," he said softly. "Let's just enjoy this moment." They sat together at the table, their half-eaten cornbread forgotten, sharing stories and dreams about their growing family. Lucy had pulled her chair closer to Sammy's, and they were already making plans for teaching Michael all their favorite games. Eli looked around at their faces, illuminated by the soft kitchen light. Grace's gentle smile, Sammy's thoughtful expression, Lucy's boundless enthusiasm. This was his family, built not just on blood ties, but on choice, on love, on faith in each other. And soon, they would welcome another child into this circle of love, making their family even more complete. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the background, marking this perfect moment in time. Their laughter echoed off the walls, creating a symphony of joy that filled every corner of their home. It was everything Eli had ever dreamed of, and more than he'd ever dared to hope for during those dark days when he'd felt so alone. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the diner's weathered sign, now proudly displaying Grace's table in fresh blue paint. Eli Harper stood outside, his work-worn hands tucked into his pockets as he gazed at the new family photo hanging just inside the entrance. The image captured a moment from last Sunday's community dinner. Eli, Grace, Lucy, and Sammy, surrounded by smiling faces of townspeople who'd become more than just customers. His eyes lingered on Grace's smile in the photograph, remembering how far they'd come from that first day when she'd whispered those life-changing words about $1 million bill. The diner's windows gleamed from their morning cleaning, reflecting the early light and the steady stream of people already making their way inside. Some carried covered dishes for the community pantry, while others simply came seeking the warmth that now defined this place. Miss Eleanor, their eldest regular customer, waved as she shuffled past him with her walker. "Morning, Eli. Save me my usual spot?" Her voice crackled with warmth, like a grandmother greeting her favorite grandchild. "Always, Miss Eleanor," Eli responded, holding the door for her. "Coffee's fresh," and Grace just pulled her cinnamon rolls from the oven. Inside, the diner hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of silverware. The walls, once bare save for a few faded prints, now told stories of their own. Photos of families they'd helped, thank you cards, and children's drawings created a tapestry of community love. In one corner, a board listed current needs, everything from baby formula to winter coats. And beside it, a growing collection of items donated by those who could give to those who needed. Grace emerged from the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, her face glowing with purpose. She carried a tray of still steaming rolls to the counter, where several regulars waited patiently. Each person she served received not just food, but a moment of genuine connection. A touch on the shoulder, a question about family, a shared laugh over an old joke. Eli watched her work, his heart full. The diner had become more than they'd ever dreamed, not just a place to eat, but a sanctuary for the weary, a haven for the brokenhearted, a place where hope was served alongside hot coffee and warm bread. People came here not just for meals, but for healing, for community, for the kind of love that asked nothing in return. Lucy burst through the kitchen doors, now tall enough to carry her own tray of water glasses. At 12, she'd grown into a confident young lady who knew every regular by name and story. Behind her, Sammy followed with napkins and silverware, his health restored and his smile bright. The cancer that had once threatened to take him was now just another chapter in their story of redemption. Grace caught Eli's eye across the room, and they shared a moment of silent understanding. She made her way to him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thinking deep thoughts?" she asked, sliding her arm around his waist. "Just grateful," he replied, pulling her close. "Remember when this place was just four walls and a grill?" She laughed softly. "Now it's a little bit of heaven on earth." They watched as Lucy helped an elderly man to his usual booth, while Sammy rushed to hold the door for a young mother struggling with a stroller. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the words Eli had painted on the wall years ago. "Your bill is $1 million, and it's already paid in full." Below it, dozens of sticky notes covered the wall, each bearing messages of gratitude and hope from people whose lives had been touched by the diner's ministry of love. "I never thought we'd be standing here like this," Grace murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That day when I covered your bill, I was so broken myself. I didn't know I was helping build something bigger than both of us." "God knew," Eli said simply. "He knew what we all needed, not just a meal or money, but each other." They watched as their regular customers helped newcomers feel welcome, sharing stories and offering encouragement. The diner had become a place where strangers became family, where broken hearts found healing, where hope was restored, one cup of coffee at a time. Through the window, they could see members of their community arriving for another day. Some came to eat, others to serve, all part of the beautiful tapestry their lives had become. The sight of so many people, once strangers, now bound together by love and common purpose, filled Eli's heart with quiet joy. "Should we get back to work?" Grace asked, though she made no move to leave his side. "In a minute," Eli replied, savoring the moment. "Let's just watch for a bit longer." Lucy and Sammy joined them, forming a tight family circle. Lucy slipped her hand into Eli's, while Sammy pressed close to his mother's side. Together, they stood in comfortable silence, watching their extended family of customers and friends fill the diner with life and love. "This is what it's all about," Eli said softly, looking at Grace. "Giving and receiving love." Grace smiled, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Yes, it is." Hand in hand, surrounded by their children and the community they'd helped heal, they stepped back into the diner, ready to continue their work. The morning sun streamed through the windows, blessing another day of service, another chance to share the love that had transformed their lives. As they crossed the threshold, the bell above the door chimed softly, welcoming them home to the place where their story of redemption had begun, and where countless new stories of hope. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Harper, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.